Have you been worried about not sewing faster, not having a neater job, and not being too productive? In this video, I'm going to share with us 4 tips that can help us to sew faster, neater, and as such be more productive in our sewing as in per day. Okay, so let's get right into it. So, number one tip I'm going to share with us today has to do with planning whatever outfit we want to sew. Are you the type that when you go to the shop, you just pick out any fabric you see, you start cutting, and in between you realize the color of the zipper is not here, the color of the thread has finished, and all of that? There's nothing that slows sewing than realizing that the things you need to complete a particular project are not complete, like they are not around you. So number one tip is that before you begin to sew anything, any project you want to embark on, first and foremost, analyze the design. In the process of analyzing, you're going to write out the things that you need to complete this project, the thread that you need, the amount of thread that you need, the color of the thread, if it's going to have a zipper, the color of the zipper, what type of zipper, if it's going to have interfacing, essay, whatever it is that it's going to have, you make sure that you have everything around you. There's nothing more frustrating than after sewing for a long time, just when it's about to finish, the thread is no longer there. And maybe it's into the night and you can't go out to go and buy the thread. I know it has happened to someone here. The next thing is to abandon it till the next day. If it's a client's dress, then you're going to continue the next day. If it's your own dress, the completion is in the hand of God, right? So, number one tip, get everything ready. This will make the work 50% faster, right? That's number one. Now, number two tip is that before you start sewing, you need to iron the fabric, and if the fabric has a lining, iron the lining. Okay, you may wonder what is the essence of ironing before cutting. This has to do with being both neatness and sewing faster, right? So though not all fabric requires you to iron them, there are fabrics that does not require your ironing. Okay, like sunray fabric, you don't need to iron them. But any fabric that requires ironing that is rumpled, please learn to iron before you start cutting. Learn to iron before you start cutting. Ironing makes the job easier. It makes it easy for you to cut without mistakes, and even while sewing you will not have that difficulty or having a rumpled looking dress. Okay, so ironing makes the work neater and also contributes to being fast, in that you may not be inclined to ironing the rumpled dress all the time. I hope this is clear. So for me, before I start any project, so long as the fabric requires ironing, cotton fabric, whatever it is that require ironing, both the fabric and the lining, I'm going to iron them. Now the next step is going into the markings. Whether you're drafting or cutting on the fabric, there are things that you draft and there are things that you might not need to draft. Whether you're a freehander or a pattern drafter, whichever one you are, so long as you're going to be cutting, make sure your markings are accurate. If you have wrong markings, it's going to delay your work, in that in the process of sewing you realize that the measurements are not right, or something of that nature that will warrant you to go over to the table and start adjusting. These things can delay your sewing, and of course the outcome will not be fine. If the dress does not fit the person it is made for, then it is not a great job. Okay, it's not neat, no matter how neat it appears. If not done, if it's not productive, because you have to go over it again and start doing it, and even if you don't go over, you won't feel happy that you've done something that is not right. Okay, so make sure the markings are accurate. Make use of your measuring tape. Cross check, cross check, cross check. It is better to measure twice and sew once than to measure once and sew twice. I hope that is clear. Mark your drawings very accurately, and that comes also from taking accurate measurements. This will help you to sew very well, neater and faster. Now the next tip I'm going to share with us has to do with cutting, as in cutting everything that you need. Let's assume you want to make a dress with bustier. When you cut the fabric, cut the lining, cut the estay, cut the wording, cut whatever thing that is going to be involved that has to do with cutting, that is possible to be cut before you start sewing. Make sure you cut everything. If it is a skirt and blouse, cut the skirt and blouse at once. If it has a peplum, cut the peplum together. Cut the sleeve together. If it has a lace attachment, cut everything together. And if you're going to be sewing more than one dress, I advise that you cut everything in one day. This has to do if you're sewing into the week. Okay, cut everything together. Cutting everything together will make it possible that when you sit down to sew, all you have to do is just keep sewing and in between iron. So you will not have to, after sewing for a while, you go back to the table and start cutting again and come back to the table. That thing can be so draining. So I advise that you cut everything cuttable, everything cuttable, cut them at once. And then after cutting, you proceed to ironing. Anything that deserves to be ironed, iron it at once. Don't wait to after fixing one part, you come and iron the other parts that will also go into the dress. So long as you've cut it, iron it. This does not rule out the fact that as you sew, you iron to keep a very neat job. But to make it faster, cut at once, iron the ones that need to be ironed, like iron everything before you go over to the sewing machine. Now, another tip that I'm going to give us has to do before we start cutting. Okay, before you go to the cutting table, your machine that you're going to be sewing with, that thing can be frustrating when you start sewing and the thread is cutting, it is jumping, it is doing this or doing that, like it was just waiting for you to come and sit and start sewing. It can be so frustrating. Now, what I do is that before I start cutting, as in preparing to sew, I will have to iron the sewing machine. Ironing this, did I say iron the sewing machine? I will have to oil the sewing machine. Okay, oiling the sewing machine will make it easy. Like if there's any part that is stiff, if there's any part that is going to make the thread to cut, the oil is going to, in fact, oiling the machine does 70% of the machine. It solves 70% of the problem that the machine is going to have. So doing this before you start cutting will make the oil to touch every part that needs to be touched before you come over to start sewing. It's not right when you just want to start sewing, you add oil. The oil is going to stain on your dress. Okay, so oil the machine before. I hope this thing I'm saying here, I don't like it. I hope it's not distracting you, but there's nothing I can do about it right now. I'm trying to avoid it. Okay, so like I was saying, try to oil the machine, service it. Like you don't need to call someone to come and service it for you. Service it by yourself, in that you have to clean the part that is dirty, remove the dirty, change your sewing needle. Change your sewing needle before you start any major work. Change the needle that you've been using to sew other previous work. Okay, get a good thread. Having a bad thread can also contribute to the reason why the thread will always be cutting and cutting and cutting. All right, so get a good sewing thread. Get your needles that is suitable for the fabric you want to sew. Like if you want to make a chiffon, you don't need a size 18 needle. It's going to be frustrating. So get the size of the needle that is accurate, get your thread, oil the machine, and put everything in order before you start cutting so that the oil can go around before you come to the sewing machine. Now that is soft. The next thing is that we're going to start sewing. Now, while we are sewing, like I said before, everything that you need, the materials you need are all around you. The zipper, the thread, this, everything, everything is around you. It is now left for you to start sewing and concentrate. Now, another major issue why most of the time we do not sew neat job is because we are often tired of ironing. So advise that let your ironing table be close to your sewing machine. Ironing table is different from cutting table. So let your ironing table be close to you so that once you sew a major part that is rough, you go to the to the ironing table and press it down. Pressing is different from ironing. Pressing is different from ironing. You're ironing to remove wrinkles, to make the surface neat. You're pressing to make sure that any bump is suppressed, like it becomes flat. Okay, so pressing and ironing are not the same. in anything that you sew. When you turn your facing, after top stitching you turn the facing, okay, that needs to be ironed to keep it, needs to be pressed to keep it relaxed. After joining the side, the bust here, you need to press to keep it relaxed. Okay, when you do major jobs, it can be tasking, but you have to patiently do it. This has to do with producing a neat job, a neat job that when you're done, you might not need so much ironing, even though you're still going to iron. This is part of the reason why you go to the boutique, see a dress, and you pay so much amount of money to get it, because it is just neat. It is very neat. Unlike the one that is not ironed, you're looking at the 6 pieces that is not ironed, you wonder who is going to wear it. Okay, so make sure you iron. Now, while I told us that this is going to pass 4 tips, but let's get into it. Before you start sewing, you see this thing, you see this thing, we call it bobbin or reeler. Okay, reel as much as you know can, that can be enough for you to complete your sewing. If it's up to 3 4, depending on what you're sewing, reel all the thread at once. It can be annoying when your mind is into the sewing and all of a sudden it's no longer sewing because this thing, the thread has finished, right? So make sure you reel as much as possible. That can be enough for the project that you have at hand, so that you will not go over the pain of having to reel this every single time. Complete this before you start sewing. Now the next thing is to set a time for yourself. You know what you can do. Why not just set time that before so time I should be done with this? Okay, this will help you to focus your mind on that time, that before this time I want to finish this project. Okay, setting time is very necessary. It gets you accountable to yourself, accountable to what you have to do. And of course, while on the sewing machine, don't try to be too careful because you want to deliver a neat job. Being too careful, no one can be extra careful in this world, in whatever you're doing. Don't try to be too careful, and by so doing, you tend to be slow in sewing. I mean, be faster with the sewing machine. Use your legs if you're using the manual machine. If it's the electric machine, fine, it's fast. So press it, let it run. Okay, so long as you've set the fabric, you've set the area that you want to sew, fly with it. Okay, but then when you're getting to a place, to a part of the sewing where you have bump, like it's not that small that the needle can just pass through it, please and please slow down. Don't rush it, and especially where you have a pointy curve, don't rush it. Slow down so that you get that place accurate. And if it's a bump, so you don't break the needle, you break the needle, you start fixing the needle again, start fixing the thread, it can slow down the sewing. So when you get to a part that has a bit bump, please gradually, gently manipulate the sewing machine to pass over it. It doesn't jump the thread and the needle does not break. I hope this makes sense to you. So while you're running on a very high speed, we don't want to be too careful, but we want to be careful. I hope you understand. Also make sure that if you are the type that likes to listen to good music, please play music in the background. Music that gets you focused, music that gets you thinking about something, but not distracting. Okay, so you can actually play music. I enjoy playing music that keeps me my thoughts aligning with the music or the lyrics of the song. Okay, it helps me concentrate and so faster. So if you're the type that likes to listen to music, listen to music. It keeps the brain working, keeps it thinking, and keeps it moving. Now, the very last, the Oga Patapata of them all, the general overseer, is that do not be making use of your phone while sewing. I mean, you want to check every message, you want to know what is happening on social media, you want to know what is happening in your friend's life. As you're sewing with the phone close, my sister, you're not finishing today. Okay, so if you want to be very productive, the phone can be so distracting. Don't try to respond to every message, even if you made a post and plenty people are tagging you and commenting. Don't try to check social media at the point when you're serious with your sewing. If you do, it's going to delay you. This is very, very serious. Okay, like it has happened to me severally, and I know it can happen to any other person. So don't try to be here and be there. Don't be on the projects that you have at hand and then be on social media checking messages, replying to people, making comments. Give yourself time. If you give yourself like 3 hours at a stretch, 3 hours at a stretch, sewing, concentrating, you find out that you finish the major thing that you have to do in a day than you can ever realize, right? Then remember that when you're tired, just go and rest. If you're tired, just go and rest. If you don't, you continue to make mistake, and that will bring you back to where you started from. And of course, you're not going to be more productive, you're not going to have a good outcome, and you're not going to be fast. Okay, so listen to yourself. When you're tired, rest, come back, and you realize how simple what you're doing actually is. Okay, so I hope that with those few tips of mine, you will be able to sew faster, neater, be more productive in your day-to-day activity that has to do with sewing and sewing beautiful dresses. All right, see you in my next video.